Hello, welcome to Insights in Action with Orange 142, where we interview agency leaders and business owners to uncover the journeys, strategies, and insights that drive their success. At Orange 142, we're all about transforming brand stories into impactful digital experiences through innovative media and marketing solutions. And today I'm lucky to be joined by Eli Altman of 100 Monkeys. How's it going, Eli?
Doing well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. Eli, I would love to just start this off by learning a little bit more about you and your background and a little bit more about 100 Monkeys. Cool name, by the way. We'd love to hear the background of that too.
Sure. Yeah. A little bit about me. I'm the managing director at 100 Monkeys. We are a branding agency that focuses almost exclusively on naming. So, naming companies, products, services, colors, medical conditions. Naming's niche enough. So, we try not to limit what we actually name. And I got started in this as a family business. My
Mm,
father started the company when I was like 6 years old. And so I grew up in it. I went to school for graphic design and was a graphic designer for a little bit. And then people knew I had this background. So I wound up doing naming at graphic design firms and then made it full circle back to 100 Monkeys about 16 years ago. My father retired maybe 12, 13 years ago and been running and growing the studio ever since.
that's awesome. That's such a unique business to get into. Was it always a naming firm or agency, even when your father started it?
So he started out, he had an ad agency, and then he realized at some point in doing it that he'd actually named a lot of things. And and so he just decided to focus on that piece, left the ad agency to do that in 1990. Yeah, at the time, probably even weirder than it is today.
So you have a pretty interesting path here because you took on your first solo naming project at just 16, and you've obviously grown up around the world of branding. So what fascinates you most about naming and how's that shaped your approach at 100 Monkeys?
I think naming is or a name is the only part of a brand that can go absolutely anywhere, including a conversation, right? A logo can't go in a conversation. And we wind up talking about brands and products and things like that all the time. And part of it is about language. I think some people over index on that a little bit and get into like linguistics and things, but it's not like it's much more practical. It's just how we hear and remember and process and like anchor words that we hear, even if we haven't heard them before. If we
Yeah.
hear like a French brand that's even like difficult to pronounce, if you have no idea what it means, but you might still use it every day. And maybe it's someone's last name, or maybe it means something that you don't know about yet, but it's either intriguing or fancy or both. And just thinking about like how people process and acquire language has always been has always been interesting to me. And also that naming happens at the beginning of a lot of people's business journeys. And so you get to meet a lot of people who are starting new businesses, who are starting new divisions or products, and just get to talk with them at this very kind of like nascent, important point on their journey.
It's really interesting. And while you were talking, I was thinking about a couple. So there's these things that have become household brands, their names have, like things like Xerox and
Mhm.
I think Tupperware is another good example. Do you think that things like that are it's more because of the name, or was it more just the product or a combination of both that like now when we say instead of copying it, why don't you Xerox it or why don't you put it in a Tupperware?
Yeah, exactly. So the name definitely plays a role in it,
Yeah.
but then the product or the experience and their business position, everything like that plays a role too. If Xerox was an inferior product when they were really growing, they probably wouldn't have really grown. And maybe that word sticks around or maybe it doesn't. This kind of gets at this idea we talk about a lot, which is that names always exist in context. It's never just a word on a sheet of paper. There's everything that a company's doing is happening around it. And it's hard to isolate elements in that situation, be it a name, a logo, or anything else that a brand is doing. But Yeah, it's always cool situations like that. Xerox, Kleenex. And it's also sometimes brands put themselves in a position where it would be difficult or impossible for them to do that because something's really cumbersome or hard to pronounce or uncomfortable to say. Anything like that. There's lots of ways you can make that easier for people if that's a goal of yours, but it's going to take a lot more than a name to become common language for hundreds of millions of people.
Yeah, yeah. And so on that note, what do you see as the biggest mistake companies make when they're naming themselves, and how do you help clients break free from that?
Yeah, the biggest mistake is trying to play it safe, essentially. That you think, okay, we're serious, we're professional, we want people to take us seriously, so we're going to pick a strong professional sounding name. And the problem is like everybody already did that and that's boring and people won't remember it. And so then you spend a bunch of marketing trying to convince people that you're different when your name is right there telling people that you're not. And so you can really help yourself out by having a name that is really differentiated from your competition, that's memorable, that's engaging, it's easy to find. Because if you do that, it'll just make it that much easier for people to hold on to. And sounding like everyone else is, whether that's like a law firm using your last name and then you just sound like all the other people's last names, or trying to talk about these like very common things that aren't protectable: speed or strength or reliability or security or trust. Like all of these concepts that just show up everywhere tend to be very bad foundations for names because everybody talks about them already.
Yeah. Wow, that's really interesting. Now, I have this personal belief, and you please tell me if I'm wrong here, okay? I think that lots of times the name, it's the way a business works, right? Like the operational team that can get you from zero to maybe $5 million isn't necessarily the team that can get you from 5 million to 20 million, for example. And I think in a lot of ways, sometimes that's also a name, right? You see these institutions like large Coca-Cola, these types of things that have this name that kind of scales with the brand. And so, with that being said, do you think that names, as a company gets to a certain size, lots of times they should look at changing their name a little bit to be scalable? Or am I completely off there?
I think it depends how you're growing.
Mhm.
If your growth is all within a core product or a core suite of products that has really good recognition, I don't think there's a lot of different situations here. And we work with companies on renaming a lot. In those situations, it doesn't really make sense to just tell people, oh, no, it's this now. There's lots of ways to grow. And that can be through other divisions or new products or moving into working with new audiences. Like there's so many different ways. And sometimes your name, your positioning, your brand doesn't move in the way that you want your company to. And then, yeah, that would be a situation where we're thinking about a new name for either part of or all of the business makes sense. And like your example, Coca-Cola is still Coca-Cola. They also have like Powerade and Sprite and all these other,
Yeah.
like all these other vitamin water, like all these other brands that don't have the Coke name.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So you mentioned that naming requires courage and that many clients struggle with truly embracing what makes them different. And so how do you guide clients through that process of self-reflection and that bold decision making?
We talk about naming and branding a lot as like unlicensed corporate therapy.
Mhm.
Some people are just ready to do that. They either
Yeah.
intuitively understand it or they're willing to listen to you and you can just explain it. Do you see how if we give you a name that sounds like your competitors' names, that will make your life harder and not easier? And some of them will be like, yeah. And some of them will be like, I don't know. I really want to sound like those other people. They're successful and I want to be successful. So I want it to be like that. And so it's so much more about like the relationship and getting someone to believe in you than it is about the work itself.
Mhm.
And yeah, because naming and branding and visual identity, it's like subjective work.
Yeah.
It's entirely subjective. So there's no right answer. It's not
Mhm.
math or science. You're not going to know, yeah, we did it. That's the name. That's the brand, right? So you need to have some comfortability with subjective decision making. And that's one thing we really try to assess early on in projects is like, are these people or is this client comfortable with subjective decision making? And if not, are they willing to listen? Or how do we need to break this down in a way that will make them feel comfortable doing what we truly and honestly believe is the best thing for their business?
Yeah. Wow, that's a really good point. I love that. Now, you wrote a really cool blog called "Why Do I Suck at Marketing" on Medium, and it touches on the differences between branding and marketing. How do you define those differences, and why is it critical for businesses to understand them?
I guess in broadest terms, I think branding as permanent or almost permanent and marketing as experimental. And that your brand shouldn't be changing every quarter or every year. It should be pretty consistent. And your marketing should change based on what works. And there's a lot of nuance to that. But in terms of why I suck at it, I think it's like self promotion just makes me uncomfortable. I don't like to sell people things. I like to talk about something and say, this is what it is. Or if you're interested in it, please buy it. But I don't like, I get really uncomfortable promoting stuff. And I imagine that's probably part of why I wound up in branding and not in marketing, just because I'm more comfortable with the permanence. I'm more comfortable with the long term thinking. Not to say that marketing doesn't have long term thinking in it, but yeah, I've just always been more comfortable on that side of the line.
Makes sense. Wow, that's cool. Really good article that you wrote. And
Thanks.
besides that, where else can people find out more about you, and where can people find out more about your agency?
Sure. So my company is 100monkeys.com and at 100monkeys on Instagram. I write books about this stuff, about naming, branding, and running small creative studios. Those are at Picnic Press, nopicnicpress.com. And on a almost completely unrelated note, I'm doing a Kickstarter now for a dog leash that I invented with a friend. And that's called Ultra Derp. And yeah, it's a ultralight dog leash that weighs as much as a AA battery and uses advanced backpacking materials. And yeah, that's a weird and long way of saying that I think one really good way to get empathy in doing like branding and marketing is to launch things on your own. That sometimes it's really hard to know what it feels like on the other side of the fence, and getting to experience those things for yourself can be a really useful exercise.
Yeah, I love that. Wow. Thank you so much for being on, Eli. This is great.
Thanks for having me, Shiv.